All right. And with that, welcome to the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast. My name is Rob Luzinski, and I'm the community coordinator at the Stewardship Network. First, a little bit about us. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with an award-winning 20-plus year history. We are now serving 30-plus place-based TSN member communities and fiscally sponsored projects across the Great Lakes and across the country. And in addition, many TSN programs, including this one, are available to all, so we love engaging with the general public whenever possible. Our mission, we exist to connect, equip, and mobilize nature's caretakers. So I'd now like to take you a little bit deeper into the various aspects of that mission. First, connect. We bring stewards together to share knowledge, resources, and inspiration. Equip. We remove hurdles so stewards can pour more energy into their ecosystems and communities. And mobilize. We amplify the impacts of your collaborative stewardship here at home and nationwide. Now, we're particularly focused on this mobilize pillar right now because, as many of you know, it is a really special time of year for the Stewardship Network. We are in the midst of our spring challenge. So it kicked off last month during our webcast on April 8th, and it will be running through June 30th of this year. And the theme is Do More Together. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the program and also some great updates from the last month. So first, for the overview, this program was built to increase the impact and awareness of collaborative stewardship activities through peer motivation since 2008. Some of you that have been around for a while might remember the previous iterations of the challenge. TSN member communities, stewardship professionals, and volunteers are all meaningfully involved. So regardless of how you're connected to the Stewardship Network, we love to have folks participating in the Spring Challenge. And this is a celebration of what's already happening and a rallying cry to join in so we can do more together. So again, that's about, inspiring and showing that there's a groundwell of support for stewardship. And we hope that you feel that way when you are seeing the numbers pile up and you are submitting your own. Again, more information you can find at stewardshipnetwork.org/spring. Digging a little bit deeper into the attention and motivation, our job is to shout out your rolling achievements all season long and honor exceptional efforts at the end. So for both the people that are, the big submitters and may end up winning one of the cups this year and the person that's just in their backyard, we are here for all of you and we are here to document it and shout you out and share in that inspiration. We also want to remind you that TSN Boosts are back with more donated goodies because early and consistent reporting is the key to building and maintaining momentum throughout the challenge. So if you can get your information to us on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, that helps us with our tallying, and it also helps you by having more chances to win in the TSN Spring Boosts. You can also find all the great boosts that we have available at stewardshipnetwork.org/spring. You can just scroll to the bottom of the page. And now for a week 4 update. Again, I said it's been a month since we started this, so here to let you know how we're doing. Incredible. We are over 8,000 total hours, and that is about 4 times more than we were at this point in 2025. And we are at over 2,500 total participants. So that is an incredible number of people and hours that are being utilized and celebrated and documented as a part of this challenge. We are really proud of where we are, and we want to keep this momentum up. So please do visit stewardshipnetwork.org/spring and submit your hours to us. Anything that has happened from April 8th through June 30th qualifies. And thank you to Bob Zamet for putting together this wonderful graphic, which shares a bunch of the great photos that all of you have submitted as a part of the challenge. So we really love getting photos and stories because it adds more of that human element to the numbers that we all know are really important. We want to hear about the acres. We want to hear about the pounds pulled. We want to hear about the hours, but we also want to hear your personal connection to the land. Who are the people that you do this work with? What are some special moments that you'll cherish about your work in the field? All of the above. Please do share your photos and stories with us as you submit with your numbers as well. We really appreciate it. So with that, I would love to introduce Emily Grason, marine ecologist at the University of Washington, for today's talk, Participatory Science at the Leading Edge of Biological Invasion, European Green Crab in Washington State. With that, Emily, you can go ahead and take over the sharing.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm just going to pivot here to sharing my presentation, which hopefully looks good.
I see it. It looks good.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for the introduction and the invitation to come share with this network. Admit when I got the sort of inquiry, it was, learning a little bit more about what the Stewardship Network does. At first, I was a little, I guess, surprised or curious about what the Stewardship Network would be interested in learning about a marine invasive species on the West Coast. But I think that over the course of those conversations, I've really come to appreciate the natural connection between the work that a program that I lead in Washington State does in marine habitats on this critter here, European green crab, which is one that you will hopefully not encounter if you are working in terrestrial or freshwater systems. Um, but essentially that the core of the work has throughout the last decade been centered in working with the stewardship community in Washington State and really benefiting from that. So today, I'll talk a little bit about what green crab is, what the sort of situation is in Washington. But what I want to spend the most time exploring with you is actually how we think about engaging community members across multiple sectors through the participatory science lens to address this problem, what the benefits are, and what are some of the lessons that we have learned along the way. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm coming to you today from Seattle, Washington, where, as my background suggests, it is actually a little gray, which is somewhat uncommon for us this time of year, but very common other times of year. And just to contextualize myself a little bit further, my program, Washington Crab Team, is within Washington Sea Grant. So folks may or may not be familiar with the Sea Grant network. Sea Grant is actually a network of about 34 programs across the United States and territories that is a federal state partnership with NOAA and academic institutions. It operates a whole lot like agricultural extension in terms of helping people understand and address challenges facing Washington's oceans and coasts through outreach, education, and by funding research. And I'll just highlight that, Washington Sea Grant is one program of 34 of our own network that extends, from Alaska, Puerto Rico, Guam, Maine, sort of our bounding boxes. And our program in Washington is targeted with serving the entire state of Washington. And so, of course, to do that, we need a host of people. Washington Sea Grant, as a sort of non-academic unit within the university, is about 30 folks. And this is the program team that is devoted to what we call Crab Team. This is a large team of people involving, ranging from undergraduate and graduate student assistants, researchers across the university, and as well as full-time staff within the unit. So we, need a lot of people to build this size of program, as I'm sure you can appreciate, and all of these people are responsible for the great work that I'm going to talk about today as well. So to cover how Crab Team, our mission is to support Washington State's management of European green crab, a relatively recent invasion. I'll dive into a little bit more detail there in a few slides. But I want to talk about what our programming looks like and what the sort of different buckets that we spend our time working on with this one issue. I talked about us having a wide net and a deep bench. We work with a lot of people, but we go really, really deep on a single species management issue, and that's invasive European green crab. So we think about the programming across these four sectors. The core and the flagship of this program has been participatory science. And this has a couple of programs, and this is where I'm going to spend the most time talking today, including a monitoring network, a relatively new sort of complementary participatory science called MaltSearch. And the purposes of our participatory science engagement are to do early detection for this invasive species and then long-term regional tracking. The other areas, and this is basically the only slide I'll really go into depth on these, are of course outreach. Because we are a Sea Grant program and function similar to Extension, we do a lot of work translating science to the public and to knowledge users through the media, through creating teaching tools, presentations like this, a host of really dense web resources that people can use for the launching point around research and so forth. Really important part of keeping people up to date on what the science is saying about this issue in our state. One of our growth areas, as green crab have sort of continued their invasion and spread in Washington, has been building technical capacity among partners and professional staff across the state to respond to this issue. So that means doing things like developing and providing training to technical staff, biologists, and biology technicians with tribes, federal and state agencies, and other stewardship entities throughout the state that want to devote resources to this issue, providing scientific advice for them, species-specific knowledge and data interpretation and so forth, and supporting management planning to the state apparatus. In Washington, the agency in our state that is responsible for managing this invasion is Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so they're the jurisdictional lead. We don't have regulatory capacity in our role, but our role is to bring science to this table as much as we can do so. And in support of that, there's a large component. We are seated at an academic institution, and though Washington Sea Grant is not a research program, like in terms of the staff being researchers, many of us have research backgrounds, and we are a really good nexus for research collaboration. And so we have, over the course of the last decade, built a number of productive research partnerships and implemented our own research programs related to just really applied knowledge around European green crab and what knowledge is needed and can be used for management of the species. So since we are talking in a more geographically sort of broad audience than just Washington, I do want to introduce you to the species that we spend night and day thinking about and working on. This is European green crab. Its scientific name is Carcinus manus, and our little fun cocktail party fact for this species is that the Latin, this was named by Linnaeus, and the Latin translates to something like raving mad or crazy crab. And we think it got that sort of moniker by Linnaeus because it has a reputation for being just all crabs are crabby, but perhaps this one is especially crabby, and so hence the name Carcinus manus. And in terms of what are some features or traits of this crab that have made it a successful invasive, what are the things that make it notable as a species? Well, it's not really particularly a standout. A lot of people sort of, it looks a lot like other crabs, and we have to do some work to share with folks how to distinguish this from even our native crabs. But it does have some traits that are commonly associated with successful invasive species. This is a relatively small crab. The largest size doesn't get much bigger than my fist at its maximum size. We do grow them larger here on the west coast of North America than anywhere else in the world. So that's one claim to fame we have. But of course, being small is particularly advantageous in terms of the early life stages where there's larval dispersal, mostly passive larval dispersal that enables them to get accidentally picked up and transported by humans and spread to new regions of the world. It's a relatively prolific crab. Each female can produce multiple broods of eggs from a single mating. In our region, females can reach reproductive size in their first growth year, and broods can be. I've seen estimates of up to 500,000 eggs per brood, and so that just sets the stage for really rapid population growth, provided those larvae are surviving to settlement size. It is a generalist species, both in terms of diet and in terms of environmental tolerance. Our population it is, so far as we have observed, relatively free of disease and parasites. So through sort of multiple serial introduction events, this is one of the species that has left its diseases and pathogens and parasites behind and is likely benefiting from that release. I mentioned generalism, so it's ecologically tolerant, has a wide, can be found in a wide range of salinity and temperature conditions. It's relatively rugged in terms of low oxygen conditions, the things that tend to narrow the niche in intertidal marine species in our region. It has a relatively wide tolerance compared to some of our native species, meaning it just can survive in sort of more marginal habitats that might have more niche opportunity. And it's estuarine, meaning it can survive fully marine waters, but really does the best in estuaries, in part because of a little bit of extra predator release. And that just makes it more likely to get picked up in global shipping activities, which are more concentrated in estuaries than either fresh or marine water ports. So these are traits that it's an assemblage of traits that, matter not only to its invasiveness, but also to how we manage the species in the state. And they have contributed to the global spread of green crab. So here's a map that shows the native range of green crab in blue, ranging from the North Sea down to North Africa, and showing, I think one of the points I like to make when I look at this native range is that this is a really wide latitudinal gradient for a single marine species. And that also has positioned the native range to sort of evolve a relatively wide spread of genetic tolerances and resources that has come into play over the course of the invasion history. So from this native range, green crab has established invasive populations in nearly every temperate marine habitat in the world, including a couple of serial invasions or secondary invasions, of which ours on the West Coast is one. Green crabs in the West Coast of North America originated from northern New England, and that invasion goes back more than 200 years. So being, a relatively recent invasion, when folks on the East Coast have been thinking about this species for quite a long time, we do start to compare and contrast what are some of the meaningful differences in the West Coast invasion versus the East Coast. The big one for us, of course, is the timeline of the invasion, in that the residence time, or how long green crab has been present in these habitats, is at least 200 years on the East Coast. And the first detection on the West Coast was about 30 years ago. So that means a lot in terms of what we would expect for ecosystem dynamics and where we're at in terms of the sort of invasion curve, which I'll elaborate on in just a moment here. Also, habitat associations have actually so far been somewhat distinct between these two. And this has to do, we think, with differences in biodiversity in the East Coast versus West Coast marine communities that are sort of competing with or preying on European green crab. The West Coast, for instance, the native crab biota on the West Coast of North America is more diverse than the native crab biota on the East Coast. And some of those species are helpful in keeping populations of green crab out of certain habitats where it's just not survivable in the face of our iconic Dungeness crabs, or our less iconic but still really burly red rock crabs, and so forth. And then the last thing I want to flag here that's important distinction is that there is a difference in what has been discovered about the genetic resources that each of these invasions currently has. The East Coast, over the last couple of decades, researchers have documented that the East Coast represents multiple introduction events from different parts of that latitudinal gradient within the native range. That has brought both cold tolerant and warm tolerant genetic resources to the East Coast invasion. By contrast, on the West Coast, everything that we have seen so far is from what we call the southern lineage of the native range, meaning that they're somewhat limited by colder waters in their dispersal and survival and their ongoing northward range expansion. So what is that West Coast history in a little bit more detail? I mentioned that green crabs were transported by humans from the eastern United States. Genetics supports that they come from northern New England. The first confirmed detection was in 1989 in San Francisco Bay. And very rapidly, within a couple of years, green crabs started dispersing outside of San Francisco Bay via their pelagic larval dispersal phase, which looks a little bit like this. And by the 1990s, started spreading to bays and estuaries within Central California. And then from there, regional spread has been facilitated by really warm climatic ocean events, El Nino events. We had a recent marine heat wave that lasted for a couple of years that was called the blob. And iterative northward spread has continued up the coast of BC, up into southern Southeast Alaska by 2022. Currently, I think the northern range extent is something around Ketchikan, maybe slightly further north as well. So this is the sort of pattern of spread primarily northward and likely continuing. This initial range expansion skipped over these really important inland waters of Washington and British Columbia that we call the Salish Sea. And that was somewhat surprising to the state of Washington, which launched back in the 90s when green crabs were first detected in coastal Washington. Washington had to launch a early detection program for green crabs within this inland geography and failed to find any evidence before ending about a decade later. So with that, Washington did continue to monitor in coastal Washington, but similar to green crabs skipping over the Salish Sea, even while they established sort of pretty robust populations in these fjords of Western Vancouver Island, monitoring in one of our coastal estuaries on the southeast corner of the state, which is an incredibly important hub for shellfish growing in our state, and an important driver of the nation's shellfish economy as well. Green crabs were sort of blips on the radar for about a decade and a half after their initial detections in the late 90s. And these blips were really associated with those warm water events that we know drive higher survival and retention of larvae to some of these coastal estuary systems. So this was a pattern of sort of failed establishment where green crabs were dispersing, potentially coming from these northern fjords, but also from Oregon and California, which had established populations further south into the state. And so there was no active management at that time. This changed pretty significantly during our last really strong El Nino event in 2015 and 2016, when populations caused the state to really shift into a new sort of mode of detection. Now, along this timeline, and actually going back here to 2012, a pretty significant change also took place even before this increase, which is that green crabs were found by our BC colleagues in a very small enclosed basin just west of Victoria on Vancouver Island called Souk Basin. And at that time in 2012, the population was found to be established. So Washington became concerned that we were missing a potential invasion and relaunched an early detection program for European green crab. This program we started was based on the concept of the invasion curve, that green crabs arrive in very small numbers, or any invasive arrives in very small numbers, and that initial population growth after arrival is quite slow. And while it speeds up, the population grows more rapidly, fills its niche, and ultimately sort of reaches some saturation point. Concurrent with that, of course, thinking about the fact that the cost of management increases over the course of the invasion, and thinking about advancing the time of first detection as a method of reducing the cost of overall invasive management. That was the sort of framework in which, of course, we were approaching this as a classic early detection sort of goal before green crabs had been confirmed in this Salish Sea geography of Washington. So this is the point at which Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife contracted with Washington Sea Grant to help meet this early detection monitoring need. And from that collaboration, Crab Team as a program was formed. This offered a really nice opportunity to meld community engagement with invasion management. This is a program that provides a very clear application of the data and of the knowledge that folks are out in the field collecting to a very direct link with the managers doing responses. When and if green crabs are found, that information communicates and enables managers to respond, to pivot resources, to develop rapid responses and management plans that focus on that information. So this is the model that we built the early detection network with. And all along the way, I want to highlight that there are some values in our program that have really dictated and guided how we approach building out this component of our program. And, you know, among those are, we want to be doing robust science. We want that the time that community members are spending collecting the data in sometimes uncomfortable conditions to be useful for peer-reviewed publications. And as some who work in this area might know, that historically it has been a challenge to get some volunteer collected data viewed as scientifically rigorous. So that is something that we think very purposefully about. We also want the information that we collect to be directly applicable to the management issue. I'm sure that many folks here have had, and many of us are, the folks on the team who are, the phrase that comes to mind for me is, it would be interesting to know if, fill in the blank, right? And we can come up with so many questions like that. But one of our guiding principles about how to keep our program relevant is to make sure that the answer to that question is useful for the management of green crabs. And then I think what really speaks to this conversation today is the engagement of monitors doing this work as real team members. Their contributed time is valuable. How do we make the most of it? This also has led to a value of transparency. We are big believers in maybe going too far into the weeds on how we make decisions about what we are asking folks to do when we make decisions or don't, to change protocols, to use information in some ways and not others. And when we make requests of them, they deserve to know why we're asking them to do it. We also treat ourselves, I guess, in some ways as their scientists. We are their direct line to scientific information, which sometimes has to do with green crab and sometimes has to do with other coastal phenomena. And to the extent that we can help continue to interpret what we know or connect them with people who might be interested in knowing more about phenomena that they observe because they're out there being stewards of these habitats. That's a really important role that we see ourselves playing and that we're committed to. We also see them as important issue experts and ambassadors. So one of our sort of sloganized sayings that we have is that we would like monitors in the program to be some of the best informed people in the state about what's going on in the management realm of green crab that is beyond their experience of what they do month to month at their sites. And that's because, of course, with their neighbors, with their families, in their communities, they are going to be the folks who are getting awareness out much more effectively than all of our outreach seminars really can do. And in sort of building support for visibility and resourcing at the state level, our issue, they are going to be the folks who move the needle and maintain sustainability across these issues. Invasions are long-term management issues, and so we are building sustainable community support as well as engagement. So in response to these sort of initial detections, our first step was to build this early detection and monitoring network. This is a pretty traditional sort of regional bellwether site monitoring network that that has got its first traps in the water in 2015. And the goal of this network is consistency across the network. We do this through targeted site assignment. So we evaluate the sites based on their suitability and their sensitivity for this species, but also what sites across our entire state geography are actually ecologically comparable to each other so that we're making relatively clear comparisons. We have designed the network as a before-after control impact or a BACI design. With these sites were put in the water before green crab were even detected, not only to do early detection, but to track changes in such a way that we could attribute which changes were just sort of occurring independent of green crab and which changes might be caused by green crab through statistical design and an ecological monitoring, statistical monitoring approach. And this was based off of learning from a previous and other invasive species monitoring programs that get out ahead of these invasions. One of the challenges is maintaining participant engagement and buy-in, even in the absence of finding the species that nobody wants to find. But in terms of how our psychology works as humans, it keeps us really primed to keep looking if we know that while we're looking, we're also collecting really valuable information. I'll talk more about the use of that information that we collect outside of green crab as well today. And the last point here is that this is a really high engagement model, meaning that our engagement with participants is consistent and it's frequent, even as these folks are working, more than 100 miles from us. And it takes a lot of staff capacity, right? Like this is one of those programs that if anybody ever tells you that working with volunteers is free labor, that's not the way that we see it. That our equipping these folks to do this work semi-independently, as well as to do it consistently, takes a lot of engagement with them, which is both the work, but it's also the privilege of what we do, right? Like these are folks that now I have more than a decade of history with and know their and know their stories, know what's going on with them. What this participation looks like, there are currently two types of surveying that participants at these assigned sites, they're put into teams of 4 to 6 folks They are assigned a site, and they will each month, once per month from April through September, conduct a trapping survey. So they'll set 6 traps of this type and another type. And the goals here are, of course, that early detection, once green crabs have been found at an area, to track their populations, and then to study those co-occurring ecological communities. Another type of survey that the participants do is looking for the shed exoskeletons, the molts of the crabs, of any crab that they might see, with the idea that this is another way that early detection can be done. Sometimes we find evidence of crabs first by their molts rather than them coming to baited traps. This a little bit can help us track green crab populations, and then also to see what other crustaceans are using these sites. The network started in 2015 with 7 pilot sites. We gave ourselves a pilot year to go back and make some significant changes to protocols and dial in our messaging and training. And so we had about, like 35 people who were just like adventurous with us and took us at our word that this was something they wanted to spend their time doing. And they have been gracious enough to evolve with us. From that sort of pilot scale, we have grown. As of now, we are at 67 sites across the state. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're probably going to stick around that number for now. But we extend not only within the Salish Sea portion of Washington, which was our original sort of charge, but also to the coastal estuaries that are potentially impacted by green crab. So this is an early detection network. This was the first detection that was confirmed in Washington State's Salish Sea in 2016, so the second year of monitoring. This is the first European green crab to be confirmed in that geography, made by crab team monitors in their fifth survey at this site. And from that, the program has grown to result in a number of early detections that have informed management over the last decade. So on the right here, I'm showing a map that shows where green crabs were found in 2025 in Washington. The white dots are places that were surveyed, but no crabs were found. And the red dots are scaled by the relative density of green crabs. The yellow circles indicate all of the populations that this monitoring network was either directly or indirectly responsible for uncovering and then eliciting management response at. So early detection is still an important function of this network in places like the southern portion of Puget Sound and this fjord called Hood Canal, where green crabs have still not been detected. We're still in early detection mode. But monitoring is increasingly important in places where green crab populations are established. So this shows 3 of our 3 coastal estuaries and the relative catch rate, which we use as a proxy for density across these coastal estuaries. This is Macaw Bay, the yellow bars. This is Grays Harbor, the orange bars, and Willapa Bay here in the southwest corner is the red bars. And so tracking, this is how we have formed the sort of the backbone of consistent monitoring across the state. There is a lot of other trapping that's also going on now. Our 6 traps per month is not designed to control the green crab population, but it is designed to make comparisons over space and time so that we can actually evaluate what population changes we're seeing. In addition, the monitoring extends to sort of some other components. I mentioned the ecological communities that are being observed in conjunction with the trapping and molt survey. We have temperature loggers in the water at a lot of these sites, since we know temperature can play a role in a really important role in intertidal ecology and the bioenergetics. And the places that we do monitoring for green crab tend to be really, there's in many cases, they're sort of like these microhabitats, these intertidal environments where the tide comes and goes twice a day. has dramatic changes in temperature, in salinity, and so forth. And it's hard to know what's going on in those environmental conditions without directly measuring them. So this, for instance, is I think 7 or 8 years of temperature profiles, and where we can capture extreme events. This was our 2021 heat dome at one of our sites, which showed dramatic temperature excursions from any of the usual patterns that time of year. And then we can look at what that means not only for green crabs, but also for all of the other critters living there. The network component continues to be really important. These are folks, as I mentioned, that might be working more than 100 miles away from where we sit in Seattle at the university. And so how do we create across, at any given time, there's about 300 active monitors. Since 2015, we've had about 800 people who have been trained to do this work. 500, more than 500 of whom are volunteering their time. And then this is also a program that we have worked with a lot of partner agencies, tribes, and so forth to enable them to contribute work to green crab monitoring in a way that informs state management, but from a relatively low barrier, low investment on their side. We're able to facilitate them doing that work. So how do we maintain this sense of cohesion and so forth across this large space and over time? You're seeing a photo from an event that we call Crab Stock, which is a volunteer appreciation event we've hosted a couple times, and it has a very groovy theme, which you can see some folks get super into, and we very much love that. And that's another thing that we think about as well. So as you can imagine, with all of this sort of growth, we did hit a growth wall. 67 sites is about as much as we can handle. And so we started to address this question just a few years ago. On the scale of participatory science, there's often sort of this spectrum of thinking about where programs might fit on the spectrum between how large can the scope be versus how intensive it is from a program perspective and from a participant perspective. Crab Team Monitoring Network is very intensive in terms of, from the program perspective, it requires a lot of program staff to keep this going in a sustainable way. I mentioned that there's a lot of engagement and relationship building with participants, which enables us to have high retention of those participants. It requires something like 8 to 12 hours of training for each individual before they're really working independently, as well as ongoing training, continuing education, as well as, sort of refreshers and everything like that. We invest a lot in data stewardship. We do all of the permitting and reporting, which with 67 sites can be a lot of different permits and reports. And there are participation constraints. So it's intensive from the participant experience. And, sometimes this is very, very directly this is very physically demanding. This is work in muddy places. One of my favorite experiences with participants is we meet them at a site when we're going to sort of do some on-site training and get them going for the first time with traps. And we're at a beach, and it's a beautiful sandy beach. And they say, okay, let's put traps in the water. And then I say, great. And we walk away from the beach towards the muddy estuary, which is really the good habitat for green crab, but often a little bit less welcoming for the folks who are participating. And so we cultivate folks who sort of have a good attitude about doing really messy work. But it's also the case that when we work with volunteers, a lot of the folks who have the time and the interest to do this work and the flexibility are retirees who sometimes face physical constraints themselves. So this work isn't for everyone. We also didn't have the ability, and it doesn't make sense ecologically, to put sites everywhere in the state. So we couldn't serve all of the communities who were interested in having this. And age and availability, this is tide dependent work. It often benefits from people who are available on weekday daytimes, and that rules out a large swath of the communities. So we came to address a challenge of we aren't able to serve all of the community members who would like to participate in supporting the state in managing this issue. So what can we do? Well, we did what everybody does when they feel like they've hit a growth wall and they have no more capacity to grow a program. We just started another program. Why not? So in 2023, we launched a program that, with the idea of this being sort of at the other end of the engagement spectrum. We call this program Molt Search, and it basically took the Molt survey that monitors are doing regularly at the sign sites and it let it loose. This is a collaboration with our land-grant university, Washington State University Extension, and it's a really simple protocol that people can they can walk that sandy beach and collect all the shells of any crab they find, submit data on an online app, and let us know, and this enables us to see where there might be evidence of green crab that has been detected where we aren't necessarily trapping. So we call this multiple tools in the toolkit. And I wanna highlight that this is not just about making or creating work for people who really want to volunteer just to make them feel good. I think it's really important to believe in the value of what you're asking people to do with their time. And so we dove into the motivation for this. Like, we know, for instance, from doing comparisons throughout our early detection network, that when we look both through traps and through molt surveys at the same time, we don't find evidence of green crabs in both protocols at the same time in the same place. And this has taught us a little bit about how these two different ways of looking can be complementary and additive rather than duplicative. So for instance, if you look at these surveys, in 45%, only 45% of them, less than half the time, do we find both green crabs in both the trapping and the molt surveys. So less than half the time, meaning if we do both, we're more than doubling our search efficacy. We do also know that if we're only looking for molts, it's relatively less sensitive than if we were only looking with traps. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but we want to be transparent that a molt looking through molt is slightly less sensitive for looking for this needle in the haystack. We also know that we find different sizes of crabs through these different ways of looking. And so these are reasons that motivate us and motivate participants to say, like, they might, not be able to trap for various reasons. And this is not just a feel-good enterprise to have them out there on beaches looking for green crabs. This is, supported by the evidence and experience we have that their work is useful. So we have scaled up this program over the last 3 years, and currently have more than 1,500 reports, 500 unique participants, and we use a train the trainers model with this program, which isn't really feasible with our trapping network due to permitting, and the sort of statistical rigor of the search protocols means that we need to be doing all of the training ourselves. But with 10 partner trainers or more at this point, we've had more than 100 training events over the last 3 years, which blows my mind. And we've been able to do surveys all across this geography in places where there's just not a lot of trapping. These programs together have created a lot of translatability, meaning we can take this work and sort of translate it to other contexts in terms of the trapping work that gets done after green crabs are found. It's provided transferable tools for our colleagues in Alaska that are, these programs, we go and train them on what we do so that they can adapt it to their own growing needs to work with community engagement. We train up all of the trappers. All of this work of this monitoring network has really enabled us to build out and take these pieces into every realm of the management the management world. And so, with this sort of complementary approach to participatory science models, we have a relatively sort of from the participant experience, we have more participants per sort of year, but with less burden on our staff, and it requires less of them, so more people are able to plug into the program. The last sort of note or little theme I want to hit on here has to do with like the thoughts that we prioritize in our program in terms of how we keep them like working. They only sort of fulfill their intended purpose and if they meet these considerations. And this is things I talked a little bit about scaling, for instance. Reliability of data, and in terms of knowing how our methods of doing things relate to other efforts in the management realm so that we can evaluate how the information we're getting informs the work they're doing. And ultimately, if we understand the natural processes behind these methods. So what I mean here is that, for instance, in scaling, I talked about how the MALT survey is relatively less sensitive than doing the trapping, a small trapping effort for green crabs, meaning for our early detection goal, what we need to do to make both of these programs work complementary is to pile on the searches for the less sensitive detection technique, right? So that's the sort of the model where we are really pushing that effort in that direction while constraining the growth of what is intended to be this like regional network of index or bellwether sites. We also, in all of our programs, really harp on the reliability of data as well as the documentation of effort. So all data in both programs that are collected is photo verified and photo archived. And that has created repositories for research on these photo data sets that we didn't imagine. We had discovered another invasive species and can share more about that. But also documenting effort. Where were searches done where we had zeros? And convincing people of the value of zeros is also a really important part of keeping them searching. And I mentioned knowing how our methods relate to other efforts. So we use these two types of traps, and managers might look for green crabs in different ways and try to reduce their population in different ways. We need to keep the consistency in our search techniques, but at the same time, we need to translate the information to how it would compare to the same sites if someone were using different gear or looking at a different time of year. So a lot of that is sort of fueling our research engine for things about how like this is a graph showing how different capture methods relate to capturing different size segments of the population. And so really dedicating research focus to answering these questions because the folks who are out there doing management don't really have the time and the bandwidth to address these questions. So the onus is on us. And then safeguarding, sharing, and using the data effectively. If we are not doing this, we are sort of not meeting that core value of using participants' time well in terms of making them true partners in knowing why their efforts are valuable, and so forth. So this is the core value. Some of the lessons that we have learned over the last decade have to do with things like our need to stay consistent as a monitoring program and our need to be adaptive in responding to changes. How to maintain that transparency and trust with the monitors. And a lot of that actually also has to do with maintaining credibility as issue experts, making sure like we are as informed as anybody in the state as the management agencies about what's going on in these other realms. And then creating a sense of belonging in this distributed network. Visiting sites. This is one of my colleagues, Jeff, doing one of our annual site visits, or we visit about a site every site in the network gets visited about every other year to work with the monitors on site and answer questions, explore the site with them, and so forth. So these are just some of the lessons that we have learned. There are many more that we continue to learn, and hope that will carry us for at least another decade into this sort of really nice long-term ecological data set, and that's really been at its core a community engaged program. So with that, I'll just say thank you, of course, to the volunteers, partners, and funders that have worked with us over the years, and offer some time for questions if there are any. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with me.
Thank you so very much. Really appreciate that. Lots of great things to think about. You had a lot of great information, and I feel like we got a really clear picture of how the program operates. We probably only have time for one, maybe two questions, but I was curious, and I have to give you credit. The Crab Team name and logo seems so ripe for merch, and then you've got this crab stock thing going on. So my question is, beyond things like that, like how do you keep volunteers engaged? You talked a little bit about it, making sure they know the value of their work, et cetera. But I'm curious maybe what challenges you find in keeping groups engaged and how you address those.
Right. Thanks for giving me the chance to expand on that because it is a huge component of what we do. You can see that in these photos, the Crab Team hat, which actually doesn't have the logo on it, just has a green crab, and on the back it says that is like one of the most sought after, pieces. Like we actually don't even get, like you cannot get that if you don't volunteer for a year. And people, anyway, but a lot of the opportunities that we engage, I mentioned okay, so our refresher trainings and our like trainings all have an in-person component. So we are three-dimensional faces to everybody in our network. And those happen once a year. So people have at least an opportunity to see us once a year. Continuing education site visits, where we visit each site every other year, as I mentioned. We have a big public outreach newsletter, but our monitors get a specific monthly sort of update mini news, we call it, that shares relevant information. We promote we call it Crab Team Tourism, where folks visit each other's sites, get to know each other, and get to know different sites and critters. We host a winter seminar series where we'll have usually about three like online webinars through the winter to just keep us in people's minds and also share out some of what we're learning, which we never have enough time to do. And then a really big part is through the data QA process. Either me or my colleagues are emailing directly with folks as real humans. It's not just like dump your data here and like see ya. It's like thanks so much for your data. Here are the questions I have. Oh wow, that's really surprising that you saw that at your site. Or they have questions and we go and find answers, or so that type of like there are real humans behind this. And we are goofy and we do things like crab stock and tattoos and right, because that's just kind of what makes it worth spending your time on, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. With that, I think I will go into our outro slides, although we could talk more and more. And please, I encourage anybody in that has been watching today to view the contact information. If you'd like to reach out, that would be lovely, and we'll make sure to share that. But in the meantime, allow me to share the rest of my stuff. Okay, so are you seeing that now? Great. Well, we encourage you all to please become a regular at our webcast. These are the second Wednesday of the month in the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. And we'll send you a morning reminder by email anytime you sign up. You can learn more about these and also look at past webcast archives at stewardshipnetwork.org/webcast. So first, in June, we have Beyond Extraction, Rethinking Mining Ethics Through Community and Care with Sophie Lenos from Michigan State University. Then in July 2026, we have Rain Gardens, The Tricky, the Watery, and the Inspiring with Susan Bryan from Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner's Office. And lastly, we have Stewardship Starts with Community, Insights from Parks, Policy, and Nonprofits. And that's with Rebecca Stanfield McCown, who is with the YMCA Alliance of Northern New England and formerly with the National Park Service's Stewardship Institute. Now, one final reminder to please submit to the Spring Challenge. You can learn all the information you need at stewardshipnetwork.org/spring. And any work that you have done between April 8th and June 30th counts. And we hope to see some great numbers and some great photos and some great stories. With that, thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate you, and we hope to see you next month. Take care.